Princess Nara pressed her pale hand against the cold crystal window of her tower room. Far below, the capital city of Velthara stretched out like a field of glowing diamonds. Each spire pulsed with soft blue light, beautiful and perfect, just like everything else in her world. Everything except her. She watched the strange alien visitors walking through the royal gardens. These humans looked so small and fragile compared to her people. Their skin didn't glow, their bodies were short and stocky, and they moved with such odd, quick gestures. Her father, King Theron, barely tried to hide his disgust when meeting with them. To him, they were nothing more than clever animals seeking favor from their superiors. Nara touched her stomach gently, feeling the familiar ache of emptiness there. 200 years of life, and her body remained as barren as the dead moons that orbited their world. In Veltharan society, a woman's worth came from the children she could produce. The stronger and more perfect the offspring, the higher her status. Nara had brought her family nothing but shame. Her younger sisters had already given birth to multiple heirs. Even her teenage nieces showed signs of fertility that Nara had never possessed. The royal doctors had examined her countless times, their cold instruments probing and testing, always reaching the same conclusion: defective, broken, worthless. Down in the throne room, Ambassador Kim Day struggled to keep his diplomatic smile in place. The Veltharan king sat on a throne that seemed carved from a single massive crystal, his 8-foot frame making even the largest humans look like children. King Theron's skin glowed with patterns that shifted like living tattoos, marking his royal bloodline and genetic superiority. Kim had offered everything his government had authorized: advanced technology that could improve their manufacturing, rare elements from human colonies that could enhance their already impressive architecture, trade agreements that would benefit both species for generations. Each offer met the same response: a dismissive wave of the king's 6-fingered hand. The other Veltharan nobles whispered among themselves in their musical language, their voices carrying the subtle harmonics that humans could barely hear. Kim didn't need translation to understand their tone. Amusement, condescension. These tall, glowing beings saw humans as primitives who had somehow stumbled across space travel. Kim's assistant, a young diplomat named Park Min, leaned close to whisper, urgent suggestions. They were running out of options. Earth's government desperately needed this alliance. The Centauri conflicts had drained human resources, and the Veltharan Empire controlled key shipping routes that could change the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. That's when Kim noticed something the other humans had missed. In all their briefings about Veltharan culture, one detail stood out. They valued living gifts above all others, not objects or technology, but actual beings, usually rare animals or skilled artisans from conquered worlds. Kim's eyes drifted to a portrait on the wall showing the royal family. One figure stood apart from the others, her posture suggesting sadness rather than the proud bearing of her relatives. Princess Nara, the king's eldest daughter. Intelligence reports mentioned her, but always with vague terms like unavailable for marriage or removed from succession. A wild idea formed in Kim's mind. Dangerous, unprecedented, but potentially brilliant. He stood up during a pause in the negotiations, drawing surprised looks from both delegations. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the crystal chamber, "perhaps we have been thinking too small. Humans value cultural exchange above material wealth. We would be honored to receive a member of your royal house as an ambassador to our world." The throne room fell silent. King Theron's glowing patterns flickered with what Kim hoped was interest rather than rage. Several nobles gasped at the audacity of the suggestion. "Which member of my house would satisfy such an arrangement?" the king asked slowly. Kim took a deep breath. "Princess Nara, Your Majesty. We would treat her with the highest honors." The king's expression shifted to something Kim couldn't quite read. But for the first time since negotiations began, Theron was truly listening. The human medical bay felt strange to Princess Nara. Everything was smaller than what she was used to, built for beings half her height. The walls were painted in soft colors instead of the harsh crystal surfaces of her homeworld. Even the lighting seemed gentler, lacking the intense blue-white glow that had surrounded her entire life. Dr. Yunhai approached with a warm smile, carrying a tablet filled with scans and data. Unlike the cold Veltharan doctors, who had examined Nara countless times, this human woman radiated genuine curiosity rather than clinical detachment. She asked permission before each test, explained what she was doing, and actually seemed to care about Nara's comfort. "Your biology is fascinating," Dr. Yun said, pulling up holographic displays of Nara's internal systems. "What your people see as a defect might actually be something completely different. Your reproductive system isn't broken. It's been in a protective shutdown mode." Nara studied the colorful images floating above the doctor's tablet. The human technology was primitive compared to Veltharan science, but somehow these readings showed things her own people's advanced scanners had missed. Her body contained layers of complexity that nobody had bothered to explore deeply enough. "On Velthara, stress hormones are constantly elevated," Dr. Yun continued. "The pressure to be perfect, to compete, to prove genetic superiority. Your body was protecting itself the only way it knew how, by refusing to bring children into that environment." The explanation hit Nara like a physical blow. All those years of shame, of being called defective and worthless, when her body had simply been trying to protect potential offspring from the toxic stress of her society. She felt tears forming in her eyes, something that would have been seen as weakness back home, but here seemed perfectly natural. Captain Park Jun found himself visiting the medical bay more often than his duties required. He told himself it was standard protocol to check on their important passenger, but truthfully, he was drawn to Princess Nara's unique perspective on everything they showed her. She asked questions that revealed just how differently her people thought about basic concepts like family, happiness, and personal worth. During their long conversations in the ship's observation lounge, Nara would stare out at the stars with an expression Park had never seen on a Veltharan face before, wonder mixed with longing. Her people saw space as territory to control, but she seemed to find peace in its vastness. "Your species is strange," she told him one evening as they watched a nebula drift past the viewport. "You're so small and short-lived, yet you seem more alive than my people ever do." Park noticed how her bioluminescent patterns had begun to change during their journey. The rigid, formal designs that marked her royal status were softening into more organic shapes. Dr. Yun had mentioned that Veltharan's skin patterns reflected their emotional state, though most of them kept theirs locked in socially acceptable configurations. 3 months into their journey to Earth, Dr. Yun made a discovery that changed everything. Princess Nara's latest scans showed activity in organs that had remained dormant for 2 centuries. Her reproductive system was slowly coming to life, responding to the reduced stress levels and the different atmospheric composition of the human ship. "It's like watching a flower bloom after a long winter," Dr. Yun explained to Captain Park during a private briefing. "Her body is finally relaxing enough to function as nature intended, but the changes went deeper than just physical healing." Nara was laughing more, asking questions about human culture with genuine interest, and even learning to appreciate things like music and art that Veltharan society considered frivolous distractions from genetic improvement. The ship's crew began to see her not as an alien princess, but as someone who was discovering herself for the first time. She helped in the hydroponics bay, learned to play simple human games, and even started teaching interested crew members basic Veltharan language and customs. Captain Park realized that something unprecedented was happening aboard his ship. They weren't just transporting a diplomatic passenger to Earth. They were witnessing the transformation of someone who was finally free to become who she was meant to be. Earth's gravity felt lighter to Princess Nara than her homeworld's crushing weight. She walked through the research facility's gardens, watching human children play on swings and slides while their parents sat nearby, relaxed and laughing. The scene would have been impossible on Velthara, where children were constantly tested and measured, their worth determined by genetic markers rather than joy. Dr. Yun had set up a comfortable living space for Nara within the Xenobiology Research Center. The rooms were filled with plants from dozens of different worlds, creating an atmosphere of warmth and life that felt completely foreign, yet somehow right. For the first time in her long existence, Nara woke up each morning without the crushing, weight of disappointment hanging over her. The changes in her body continued to amaze the human medical team. Her skin patterns had evolved from the rigid royal markings into flowing organic designs that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her bioluminescence had grown brighter and more varied, displaying colors that Dr. Yoon had never seen in any Veltharan medical texts. "Your DNA is rewriting itself," Dr. Yoon explained during one of their weekly examinations. "Not changing the core structure, but activating sequences that have been dormant for generations. It's like your body is remembering how to be something your people forgot they could become." The most shocking discovery came when Dr. Yoon compared Nara's genetic structure to human samples. Deep within both species' DNA lay identical markers, suggesting they had shared common ancestors millions of years ago. The implications were staggering. Humans and Veltharans weren't completely different species after all, but distant cousins separated by time and space. Captain Park had been reassigned to Earth permanently to oversee the cultural exchange program, which gave him more opportunities to spend time with Nara. Their conversations had evolved from formal diplomatic discussions to genuine friendship, and recently into something neither of them had expected. They would walk together through the facility's botanical gardens, talking about everything from philosophy to their childhood memories. Nara described growing up in a palace where every meal was scheduled, every activity measured for genetic benefit, every relationship calculated for political advantage. Park shared stories of family barbecues, pick-up basketball games, and the chaotic warmth of human family gatherings. "Your people live such short lives," Nara said one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded her of her changing skin patterns. "Yet you seem to experience more genuine happiness in a decade than most Veltharans feel in centuries." Park found himself studying the graceful way she moved, the musical quality of her voice when she was relaxed, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new about human culture. He knew the regulations strictly forbade romantic relationships between species, but his feelings had grown beyond his ability to control them. The situation became more complicated when Nara began experiencing strange symptoms. She felt dizzy in the mornings. Her appetite changed dramatically, and her bioluminescent patterns started displaying colors that had no known meaning in Veltharan biology. Dr. Yoon ran every test she could think of, consulting with xenobiology experts across the human colonies. The answer came from an impossible source, a pregnancy test designed for human women. The results showed positive, which should have been meaningless for a Veltharan. But when Dr. Yoon ran more detailed scans, she discovered something that made her hands shake as she reviewed the data. Princess Nara was carrying a child, a hybrid, offspring that combined human and Veltharan genetics in ways that theoretical science had declared impossible. The baby's DNA showed characteristics from both species, creating something entirely new in the known galaxy. The news sent shockwaves through both the human research facility and the diplomatic corps. Emergency meetings were called to discuss the implications. Some officials wanted to keep the pregnancy secret to avoid panic or political complications. Others argued that this represented the most significant biological discovery in human history. For Nara, the news brought a mixture of joy and terror. After 2 centuries of being told she was barren and worthless, she was finally carrying the child she had always dreamed of. But this wasn't just any pregnancy. This child would be living proof that the boundaries between species weren't as absolute as everyone believed. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach, feeling the first flutter of movement from the impossible life growing within her. This child would belong to both worlds and neither, carrying the hopes and fears of 2 civilizations that were about to discover they were more connected than anyone had ever imagined. The delivery room at the research facility had been specially prepared for something no one fully understood. Dr. Yoon and her medical team worked alongside Veltharan healers who had been secretly brought to Earth, creating the first truly interspecies medical collaboration in history. Princess Nara gripped Captain Park's hand as waves of pain washed over her, her skin patterns flashing in brilliant cascades of light. When the baby's first cry filled the room, everyone fell silent. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, not quite human, not quite Veltharan, but somehow containing elements of both. Little Su-Jin emerged into the world with skin that glowed softly like her mother's, but her cries carried the emotional depth that made human babies so compelling to their parents. Dr. Yoon carefully cleaned the newborn, marveling at what she saw. The baby's bone structure showed the elegant length of Veltharan genetics, but her muscle development and organ placement followed human patterns. Most remarkably, her respiratory system seemed designed to handle both the oxygen-rich atmosphere of Earth and the thin, cold air of Velthara. "She's perfect," Park whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter for the first time. Nara's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with colors that conveyed pure joy, emotions that most Veltharans spent lifetimes learning to suppress. The weeks following Su-Jin's birth became a whirlwind of activity that no one had anticipated. Earth's government found itself dealing with legal questions that had never existed before. Was the child human or Veltharan? Did she have citizenship rights on Earth? What about inheritance laws and diplomatic immunity? News of the hybrid birth leaked despite efforts to keep it secret. Within days, reporters, scientists, and government officials from across human space were demanding access to the family. Some wanted to study the child, others saw potential political advantages, and a few extremist groups viewed the hybrid as either a miracle or an abomination. Park realized they needed legal protection quickly. He arranged a small, private wedding ceremony that combined human traditions with Veltharan bonding rituals. The marriage would give Nara legal status as his wife and provide Su-Jin with full human citizenship rights, while the Veltharan elements honored her cultural heritage. The ceremony took place in the facility's garden, witnessed only by Dr. Yoon and a handful of trusted colleagues. Park wore his dress uniform while Nara draped herself in flowing fabrics that complemented her natural luminescence. When they exchanged vows, her skin patterns synchronized with his heartbeat in a display of connection that left everyone speechless. As baby Su-Jin grew, she displayed abilities that amazed both species. By 3 months, she was making eye contact and responding to voices with an awareness that suggested accelerated cognitive development. Her bioluminescent patterns would shift to match her parents' emotional states, as if she could sense their feelings directly. Dr. Yoon documented everything carefully, working with xenobiologists and child development experts to understand what they were witnessing. Su-Jin seemed to inherit the best traits from both species while avoiding many of their limitations. She was emotionally responsive like humans, but also possessed the enhanced physical capabilities of Veltharans. The most striking discovery came when Su-Jin was 6 months old. During a routine medical checkup, she began glowing in response to Dr. Yoon's presence, but the patterns were completely unlike anything seen in pure Veltharan biology. When the doctor moved away, the baby became fussy until she returned, suggesting some form of empathic connection. "She's not just combining human and Veltharan traits," Dr. Yoon explained to Park and Nara during one of their weekly consultations. "The hybrid genetics seem to be unlocking potential that neither species developed on their own. She's becoming something entirely new." Park found himself studying his daughter with wonder and growing concern. Su-Jin was undeniably special, but that specialness made her a target for those who would exploit her unique abilities. He and Nara had created more than just a child. They had brought forth a being who represented the future of interspecies evolution. The family's peaceful existence at the research facility couldn't last forever. As Su-Jin's abilities became more apparent, pressure mounted from various governments and organizations who wanted access to her. Park knew they were living on borrowed time before the outside world would force its way into their lives, whether they wanted it or not. But for now, he was content to watch his wife teach their daughter simple Veltharan songs, while her skin patterns danced with gentle light, creating a bridge between worlds that had never seemed possible before. 3-year-old Su-Jin sat cross-legged on the floor of her father's office, her small hands pressed against a piece of Veltharan crystal. Technology. The device which had puzzled human engineers for months suddenly came to life under her touch. Holographic displays flickered into existence, showing star maps and data streams that no human had been able to access. "Daddy," the machine is singing, she said in her clear, musical voice. "It wants to show us the pretty lights." Admiral Park watched in amazement as his daughter somehow communicated with the alien device through touch alone. Dr. Yoon had theorized that Sujin's hybrid brain could interface with Veltharan biotechnology in ways that pure humans couldn't manage, but seeing it happen still left him speechless. What made Sujin truly special wasn't just her technical abilities, though. Unlike pure Veltharans who treated their technology as tools, she seemed to form emotional connections with the devices. She would pet the crystal surfaces gently and speak to them like friends, coaxing them to reveal secrets that had been locked away for generations. At the same time, her human side allowed her to form the kind of deep, personal bonds that Veltharan society had almost bred out of existence. She would run to hug the research assistants when they arrived each morning, remember their birthdays with hand-drawn pictures, and comfort anyone who seemed sad with an intuition that amazed the adults around her. Princess Nara had found her, working alongside human researchers, bridging the gap between two very different approaches to science. Where humans relied on trial and error, Veltharans had developed rigid theoretical frameworks that often missed creative solutions. Nara's insights helped both sides see problems from entirely new angles. Her marriage to Admiral Park had become a symbol of hope for peaceful cooperation between species. Their weekly video calls with other interspecies diplomatic teams had established the foundation for what everyone hoped would become a new era of galactic unity. They had proven that love could exist across the vast differences that separated worlds, but their happiness was built on borrowed time, and they all knew it. Deep in space, automated probe ships carried data packets back toward Velthara through the quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy. The information traveled faster than any living being could, compressed streams of data that included everything from diplomatic reports to casual news updates. Among those data streams were medical reports about a certain hybrid child, along with video recordings of her demonstrations with Veltharan technology. The probes had been programmed to flag anything related to Veltharan citizens, which technically included Princess Nara, despite her exile. King Theron sat in his crystal throne room, reviewing the reports with growing disbelief. The daughter he had discarded as worthless genetic waste had not only proven fertile but had produced an heir whose abilities seemed to surpass anything in recorded Veltharan history. The video footage showed little Sujin activating ancient devices that his own court technicians couldn't fully understand. His advisors whispered among themselves, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with excitement and concern. Some spoke of old prophecies about star-born children who would unite distant worlds under Veltharan leadership. Others worried about the political implications of a royal heir raised among primitive humans. The king's shame and rage grew as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had given away what might be the most genetically valuable being in the known galaxy. Worse, she was being raised by aliens who didn't understand her true potential or her rightful place in Veltharan society. "Bring me the communication crystals," King Theron commanded, his voice carrying the harmonics of barely controlled fury. "I want direct contact with Earth's government immediately." His first messages were diplomatic, requesting updates on his daughter's well-being and expressing interest in meeting his granddaughter. When Earth's officials politely declined, citing the family's right to privacy and their current research commitments, the king's tone began to shift. Each rejection fueled his growing obsession with reclaiming what he saw as stolen Veltharan property. The child carried royal bloodline genetics that belonged to his empire, not to some collection of primitive humans who couldn't possibly understand her significance. Admiral Park noticed the increasing pressure from Veltharan diplomatic channels, but he underestimated the depth of King Theron's wounded pride. The man who had once dismissed his daughter as worthless was now consumed with possessing her child, driven by the recognition that he had made the greatest mistake of his long reign. As Sujin played with her toys, unaware of the political storm building around her, her parents began making contingency plans for a confrontation they hoped would never come, but feared was now inevitable. The crystal throne room of Velthara had witnessed many moments of royal fury over the centuries, but nothing like King Theron's current rage. His massive frame shook with emotion as he crushed the data tablet containing his granddaughter's latest performance recordings. The fragments scattered across the floor like broken dreams, their bioluminescent displays flickering and dying. 200 years, he snarled, his voice echoing off the crystalline walls with harmonics that made his advisors step back in fear. For 2 centuries, I believed that worthless daughter of mine was genetically defective. And now, I discover, she has produced the most powerful heir in our empire's history. The royal advisors exchanged nervous glances, their skin patterns carefully controlled to show only respectful attention. None of them dared remind the king that he had been the one to eagerly give Princess Nara away to the humans. They had all witnessed his satisfaction at disposing of what he called his family's greatest shame. Lord Chancellor Vex stepped forward carefully, his movements precise and calculated. "Your Majesty, the ancient texts speak of children born between stars, beings who would bridge worlds and unlock the hidden potential of bloodlines thought extinct. Perhaps this hybrid child represents the fulfillment of those prophecies." King Theron's bioluminescent patterns flared with colors that conveyed both triumph and humiliation. The prophecies had always spoken of such a child arising from the royal line, but everyone had assumed it would come from his successful daughters, not from the one he had discarded like waste. The video recordings had shown little Su Jin doing things that should have been impossible. She communicated with ancient Veltharan artifacts that even their greatest technicians couldn't fully activate. Her small hands would touch crystal surfaces, and suddenly star maps would appear, showing navigation routes to worlds that had been lost for millennia. But what drove the king to true fury was the knowledge that this miraculous child was being raised as a human. She played with primitive toys, spoke their crude language as her primary tongue, and displayed the emotional warmth that Veltharan society had spent generations breeding out of their people. "She is being contaminated by their inferior culture," King Theron declared, pacing before his throne with predatory grace. "My granddaughter carries the pure genetic heritage of our royal line, yet she hugs common researchers like they are family members. She is learning their weakness instead of our strength." His demands to Earth's government had grown increasingly desperate over the past months. First, he had politely requested visits to meet his granddaughter. When that was declined, he offered generous trade agreements in exchange for regular communication with the child. Each rejection made his tone more threatening and his offers more extreme. The human diplomatic responses remained maddeningly polite but firm. They cited Princess Nara's right to make decisions about her daughter's welfare, the child's need for stability during her developmental years, and various legal protections under human law. To King Theron, these were merely excuses from primitives who refuse to acknowledge Veltharan's superiority. "They think they can keep what belongs to us," he said, turning to address his military advisors. "General Cax, what is the current status of our deep space fleet?" General Cax, a veteran of numerous territorial expansion campaigns, activated a holographic display showing ship positions throughout Veltharan space. "Our main battle groups are conducting routine patrols, Your Majesty. The First Fleet could be recalled and repositioned within 6 standard cycles." The king studied the tactical display with the calculating gaze of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds during his reign. The humans had proven surprisingly resilient in their conflicts with other species, but they had never faced the full might of the Veltharan Empire. Their technology was crude, their ships were small, and their military doctrine was centuries behind Veltharan's strategic thinking. "Begin preparations for a diplomatic escort mission," King Theron commanded, his words carrying the kind of formal authority that made his advisors' skin patterns shift to attention configurations. "If the humans will not return my family voluntarily, we will retrieve them by force." Lord Chancellor Vex cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, the diplomatic consequences of military action against Earth could be severe. Other species might view it as unprovoked aggression." King Theron's laugh was cold and bitter. "Let them try to stop us. The child is Veltharan royalty, and no collection of primitives has the right to keep her from her birthright. She will take her place in our society, learn our ways, and fulfill the destiny that her genetics demand." The orders went out across the Empire's communication networks within hours. Ship captains received sealed instructions to prepare for extended deep space operations. Supply depots began loading vessels with everything needed for a campaign far from home. The Veltharan war machine began moving with the terrible efficiency that had conquered most of their sector of the galaxy. King Theron stood alone in his throne room, after dismissing his advisors, staring out at the stars that contained his lost granddaughter. His pride would not allow him to appear weak before his subjects or other species. The humans had made him look foolish by turning his greatest mistake into their greatest treasure. But he would correct that mistake, no matter what it cost. The Matthew. Alarm systems at Earth's deep space monitoring stations had never detected anything like what appeared on their screens that morning. Dozens of massive ships materialized at the edge of the solar system, their crystalline hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The Veltharan war fleet had arrived, and its intentions were unmistakably hostile. Admiral Park stood in the command center of Earth's primary defense station, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of professional concern and personal terror. Those ships carried enough firepower to turn entire planets into glowing debris, and they had come for his family. His hands trembled slightly as he activated emergency protocols that he had hoped never to use. The communication from King Theron came through on all frequencies simultaneously, his towering figure appearing on screens across Earth's military network. His bioluminescent patterns flashed with colors that conveyed absolute authority and barely contained rage. Humans of Earth. The king's voice carried harmonics that made the speakers vibrate uncomfortably. You hold members of my royal family. Against their will. Princess Nara and her child belong to the Veltharan Empire. You have 72 of your hours to return them, or we will retrieve them by force. The message cut off abruptly, leaving Earth's leadership scrambling to respond to a crisis unlike anything in human history. Emergency sessions convened in government buildings around the world as military strategists tried to calculate how long human defenses might hold against such overwhelming odds. Back at the research facility, Princess Nara sat in her garden with 6-year-old Su-Jin, trying to explain why suddenly there were armed guards at every entrance and why Daddy had to go away to his important job. The child listened with the kind of serious attention that adults found unsettling in someone so young. "Mama, why's grandfather angry?" Su-Jin asked, her own bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion and concern. "The machines tell me he's very sad inside, but he shows anger outside." Nara's heart clenched at her daughter's perceptive question. Su-Jin had inherited the ability to sense emotions through Veltharan biotechnology, but she interpreted those feelings with human empathy rather than Veltharan clinical detachment. She could feel her grandfather's pain across the vast distance of space. "Sometimes people make mistakes, little star," Nara said, using the pet name that had emerged naturally from Su-Jin's unique heritage. "And sometimes those mistakes make them so ashamed that they get angry instead of sad." The child considered this with the kind of thoughtful expression that reminded Nara just how different her daughter was from other 6-year-olds. Su-Jin possessed intellectual capabilities that amazed researchers, but she also showed emotional wisdom that seemed to come from some deep understanding of both her heritages. Admiral Park returned home each night, exhausted from endless strategy, meetings, knowing that every plan they developed would likely result in massive casualties on both sides. Earth's fleet was brave and determined, but the technological gap between human and Veltharan military capabilities was enormous. They were preparing for a war they couldn't win. "There has to be another way," he told Nara during one of their quiet evening conversations. "I won't let them take you and Su-Jin, but I can't ask millions of people to die protecting us either." Nara faced her own impossible choice. She could return to Velthara with her daughter, probably preventing a war, but condemning Su-Jin to grow up in the same toxic environment that had nearly destroyed her own spirit. Or she could stay and watch two civilizations tear each other apart because of her father's wounded pride. That night, as her parents whispered worried conversations in the next room, Su-Jin lay in her bed staring at the ceiling where she had projected a holographic star map using a small piece of Veltharan crystal. The map showed the positions of both fleets, human and Veltharan, facing each other across the cold vacuum of space. Her unique hybrid mind could process the tactical situation with clarity that surprised even her. She understood that her grandfather wasn't really angry about honor or genetics or royal bloodlines. He was hurt because he had thrown away something precious and only realized its value after it was gone. More importantly, she could sense something through the Veltharan bio-network that the adults had missed. King Theron wasn't just demanding her return. He was desperate to prove to himself and his people that he wasn't the fool who had discarded his most valuable heir. His rage was really shame wearing armor. The next morning, Su Jin walked into her parents' bedroom and made an announcement that left them both speechless. "I want to talk to grandfather," she said with the calm confidence of someone who had already made up her mind. "Not through the communication crystals, in person. If he meets me, really meets me, maybe he'll remember that families are supposed to love each other, not fight wars." Admiral Park's first instinct was to say absolutely not, but something in his daughter's expression stopped him. Su Jin wasn't making a child's impulsive request. She was proposing a solution that none of the adult diplomats or military strategists had considered. "That's incredibly dangerous, little star," Nara said gently. "Your grandfather is very angry right now." Su Jin's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that conveyed determination mixed with compassion. "He's not angry at me, Mama. He's angry at himself. Maybe if I show him that I'm happy, that you're happy, he'll understand that some mistakes can become good things." The shuttle Harmony approached the massive Veltharan flagship like a tiny bird flying toward a crystal mountain. Admiral Park sat beside his 6-year-old daughter, watching her calm expression with a mixture of pride and terror. Every military advisor had called this mission suicide, but Su Jin had insisted with the kind of quiet determination that reminded him she was far from ordinary. "Remember what we practiced, sweetheart," he whispered, as the docking bay grew larger in their viewport. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you tell me immediately." Su Jin nodded, her bioluminescent patterns glowing softly with colors that conveyed both nervousness and resolve. She wore a simple white dress that her mother had chosen, along with a small pendant containing a fragment of earth crystal, a reminder of home in this alien environment. The Veltharan flagship's interior made human technology look like children's toys. Everything was carved from living crystal that pulsed with its own inner light, creating corridors that seemed to breathe with organic energy. The escort guards towered over the human visitors, their 8-foot frames moving with predatory grace as they led the way to the throne room. King Theron waited on a platform that elevated him even higher above his guests, his massive presence. Designed to intimidate anyone who approached, he expected to see a primitive child cowed by his majesty, perhaps crying for her parents like any normal 6-year-old would in such circumstances. Instead, Su Jin walked forward without hesitation, her small hand still holding her father's but her posture straight and confident. When she reached the base of the throne platform, she did something that shocked everyone present. She spoke, in perfect ancient Veltharan, using the formal court language that even most nobles struggled with. "Greetings, honored grandfather. I am Su Jin Park Nara, child of 2 worlds, and I come seeking understanding between our peoples." The throne room fell completely silent. King Theron's bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion and surprise. This wasn't the primitive hybrid he had expected, but a being who somehow commanded presence despite her tiny size. "You speak our language well, child," the king said, his voice carrying less authority than he intended. "But words are just sounds. Show me what makes you worthy of royal blood." Su Jin approached one of the ancient crystal panels that decorated the throne room. These artifacts had been dormant for centuries, their purposes lost to time. When her small hands touched the surface, the entire panel erupted in brilliant light, displaying star charts and data streams that no living Veltharan had seen before. But what truly unsettled King Theron was how she interacted with the technology. Where pure Veltharans commanded their devices with cold efficiency, Su Jin seemed to communicate with them like friends. She coaxed secrets from the crystals with gentle touches and soft words, treating ancient machines with the kind of empathy that his species had forgotten how to feel. The crystals remember when our peoples were young, she said, turning back to face her grandfather. They tell stories about a time when Veltharans felt happiness the way humans do now, before you decided that emotions were weakness. King Theron felt something crack inside his carefully constructed worldview. This child possessed abilities that exceeded anything in recorded Veltharan history, yet she radiated warmth and genuine affection. When she looked at him, her expression showed concern for his pain rather than fear of his power. "Why do you care about an old king who gave your mother away?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been in decades. Sujin climbed the steps to his throne platform, ignoring the gasps from the assembled courtiers. When she reached the top, she walked right up to his massive form and placed her tiny hand on his arm. Her bioluminescent pattern synchronized with his, showing him through direct biofeedback that she felt no hatred, only sadness for his loneliness. "Because you're family, grandfather, and families are supposed to love each other even when they make mistakes." The king stared down at this impossible child who spoke of love as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Her human heritage allowed her to feel and express emotions that Veltharan society had spent generations suppressing. Yet her abilities proved she was everything they claimed to value about genetic perfection. "I have spent 3 centuries building an empire on the principle that strength comes from genetic purity," he said slowly. "You are living proof that I was wrong." Sujin activated the throne room's communication system with a touch, her hybrid abilities interfacing with technology that should have been beyond her reach. Suddenly, her small voice was broadcasting across both fleets, reaching every ship. "In the human and Veltharan armadas, my name is Sujin, and I'm talking to all of you because I don't want my family to fight," she said, her childish words carrying across star systems through quantum communication networks. "My grandfather made a mistake a long time ago, and now he's too proud to say he's sorry. But mistakes don't have to become wars." Her message continued, broadcast live to billions of beings across 2 civilizations. "I love my human daddy and my Veltharan mama. I love Earth, where children play and laugh. I love the crystal cities, Velthara that sing with ancient songs. Why can't I love both? Why can't we all be one big family among the stars?" King Theron watched his granddaughter challenge everything his empire stood for, using nothing but honest questions and unconditional love. She was forcing both species to confront the prejudices that had driven them to the brink of war, and she was doing it with the fearless honesty that only a child could possess. King Theron stood in his crystal throne room, staring at the communication displays that showed the faces of billions of beings across 2 star systems, all waiting for his response to his granddaughter's broadcast. For the first time in 3 centuries, the mighty ruler of the Veltharan Empire found himself speechless. Sujin remained beside his throne, her small hand still resting on his arm, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with patient hope rather than fear. The child, who should have been trembling before his power instead, radiated the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty in her own worth, something no pure Veltharan had felt in generations. "You speak of family," the king said finally, his voice carrying across the communication networks to both fleets. "But family requires sacrifice, child. I sacrificed your mother for the good of our empire." Sujin's expression showed the kind of gentle sadness that adult Veltharans had forgotten how to feel. "You didn't sacrifice Mama, grandfather. You threw her away because you were scared of what other people would think. That's not the same thing." The truth in her words hit King Theron like a physical blow. Around the throne room, his advisors shifted uncomfortably, their careful diplomatic masks slipping as they recognized the accuracy of the child's assessment. The king had given away his daughter not for the empire's benefit, but to avoid the shame of admitting his genetic theories were incomplete. Admiral Park watched from the base of the throne platform, ready to grab his daughter at the first sign of danger. But he could see something changing in the Veltharan king's expression. The rigid mask of absolute authority was cracking, revealing glimpses of the pain and doubt that had driven him to this desperate military action. "I built my reign on the principle that genetic perfection creates strength," King Theron continued, his voice growing quieter. "Your existence proves that our definition of perfection was limited." Sujin brightened, her patterns shifting to colors that conveyed encouragement and hope. "You weren't wrong about genetics being important, grandfather. You just forgot that the best combinations sometimes come from mixing different ingredients together, like Mama's intelligence and Daddy's kindness making me." The king found himself studying this remarkable child who combined the best traits of both species while avoiding their weaknesses. She possessed Veltharan technological abilities that exceeded anything in their recorded history, yet her human, emotional intelligence allowed her to connect with others in ways that pure Veltharans envied but couldn't replicate. More importantly, she had achieved these heights, not despite her mixed heritage, but because of it. The stress-free environment of human society had allowed her Veltharan genetics to flourish in ways that their rigid social system never could have supported. "The fleet commanders are requesting orders, Your Majesty," General Cax announced quietly, breaking the long silence that had fallen over the throne room. King Theron looked down at his granddaughter, then at Admiral Park, and finally at the communication displays showing the mixed human and Veltharan crews who had been preparing for war just moments before. His decision would determine whether this crisis ended in bloodshed or became the foundation for something unprecedented in galactic history. "Stand down all weapons," he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had ruled an empire for centuries. "Begin negotiations for a new kind of alliance." The weeks that followed became a whirlwind of diplomatic activity, unlike anything either species had experienced. The Park Nara Accords, named after the family that had made it all possible, established frameworks for cooperation that went far beyond traditional treaties. Su Jin became the galaxy's first interspecies ambassador, dividing her time between Earth and Velthara, while helping both civilizations understand each other's strengths. Her unique perspective allowed her to translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking about family, society, and individual worth. King Theron began the slow, difficult process of reforming Veltharan society, starting with the elimination of genetic discrimination laws. Princess Nara established the first exchange programs between worlds, bringing young Veltharans to experience human emotional warmth while sharing their technological insights with human researchers. Admiral Park found himself heading a new joint military command focused on exploration rather than conquest. The combined fleets that had once faced each other in preparation for war now worked together to map unknown regions of space, their crews learning to appreciate each other's different approaches to problem-solving. The changes weren't easy or immediate. Centuries of rigid thinking couldn't be overturned overnight, and both species faced resistance from conservative elements who preferred the old ways. But Su Jin's example provided inspiration for others who had felt trapped by their society's narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. 5 years after the crisis, the child who had prevented a war stood in the center of a new space station that orbited between Earth and Velthara. The facility served as a symbol of cooperation, where mixed crews worked together on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. "Look, Daddy," Su Jin said, pointing through the observation deck windows at the ships docking nearby. "The new explorers are arriving for training." Admiral Park smiled as he watched young humans and Veltharans working side by side, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. His daughter had done more than prevent a war. She had opened a door to a future where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. King Theron, now bearing the title of Elder Advisor rather than Absolute Ruler, joined them at the window. "She has given us something I thought our species had lost forever," he said quietly. "Hope for tomorrow."